Hello, scholars and families. I'm so glad that you joined me for today's art technique video. Today, we are going to learn how we can make gradients in our art and kind of where we can see them in our everyday lives. So you heard me use this word gradients. It's right here on the side of my screen, and I want us to try breaking it down. So I'm going to break it in my syllables and say gradients. Can you try that with me, scholars? Gradients. One more time. Gradients. Good job. So gradients, we've kind of talked about them in previous videos, but we've never actually gotten down to the reason why they're important and how we can make them. So that's what we're going to learn today. So let's get started. So families, when we have a gradient between colors, that means that one color is blending into another. So we can have two different colors. They can be colors that are similar or colors that are very, very different. And just like you see in these photos, you know that whenever you blend them, they kind of fade into each other. So that means that our gradients can go from light to dark. Like this gradient starts off very light with the white and then blends and blends and blends all the way until you reach a very dark black. Or you can do dark to light. And that's what this picture is showing us. So you can start off with the black and then get lighter and lighter and lighter until you reach that same white from this side. But gradients don't just have to be with black and white. So let's take a look at this gradient right here between our purple and our blue colors. This gradient is really, really fun because it doesn't move up and down. It goes from side to side. And the first color that we see on this side is a really bright blue. And then as we move this way, we see how it fades into kind of like a medium purple. And then when we reach the top all the way up over here, that's when it becomes that really bright purple. So just remember that gradients always have colors that blend, and they can be light and dark colors, or they can just be a bunch of fun, bright colors. So now let's keep going. All right, scholars. So gradients are not just made in art, and they're not just made by humans, but we can also find it in a lot of the beautiful things in nature around us. And probably the biggest thing that we see gradients in is our big sky. The sky has a lot of gradients because it's full of light and dark. It's full of light during the day, during sunrises, but it can also get dark maybe during sunset and at nighttime. So, whenever we have the changes in time and in light, we find a lot of gradients in our sky. So, let's just take a look at a few of these pictures of our sky and look to see how the gradients are changing. This first one down here, it looks like it's of a sky maybe during a sunrise or a sunset. And we see the gradient with a really light yellow and a light orange and how it changes. So the gradient we would say is a gradient of yellow, orange, and red. Maybe even a little bit of black because of these little black corners out here. But whenever we describe a gradient, we want to describe the colors that we see that are blending. So now let's try and describe this gradient. This is a gradient of just like the night sky. Let me get a different pen for that. And the night sky, if you look up at it, especially if there's lots of stars, you'll see a gradient of blue colors. So if we look down here where I'm making my pink line, you can see that we've kind of got a light blue because that's a little bit closer to our Earth. And then our gradient goes up again and it blends into the dark blues and the black one more time. So this gradient, we would say, I see a gradient going from blue all the way to black. But there's also some really fun colors and gradients that we see in the sky. They are a little bit hard to see from California, but they're called the northern lights. The northern lights, we can also say the aurora borealis. I think some of us have learned about that in STEM class. So, the aurora borealis or the northern lights is when the sky creates these really, really beautiful light rays that show up super bright, kind of like a rainbow. And the rays of light go straight into the sky. They don't go curvy like rainbows, but they go straight and point up. So, these, let's try and find a really fun gradient with these. I'm going to circle this part of my northern light, and we can see the gradient between these fun colors. We see that our lights are starting out with a very bright green, and then they move to this kind of like bluish purple right here in the center, and then they move again to that sort of pink color, and then finally they reach the top and they're more of like a dark blue and a black one more time. So this gradient is a little bit more, I guess, complicated because you have more colors in it. So this gradient, we would say, moves from green to purple to pink to dark blue. All right, scholars, now let's figure out how we can make gradients so that our artwork is a lot more kind of dynamic. So, scholars, whenever we make gradients in our artwork, we have some steps that we need to follow just so that our gradient blends very, very well. So, our step number one is this photo right here. And if you can read it over here, it says choose your colors. I chose a few colors that I wanted to blend together. I chose like a dark green, a light green, and then like a yellowish green. And then I also chose a light pink, a medium pink, like a fuchsia, and then a regular red color. So I chose my 6 colors. Now, step two is to blend them gently. Remember, gradients are all about blending, and this picture is when I started to blend my colors together. So see, I took my green, it's the exact same green, except I started to add a little bit more green and I stretched it out this way to the right because I wanted my gradient to go this way. You want your gradient to go up and down, that's a-okay too. You would just have to blend starting at the top. If you want to blend like me going sideways, then you are going to stretch out towards the other colors. You don't want to go away from the other colors because you're trying to blend them together gently. Okay, scholars? So now, step three, it's probably the longest step because it means that we have to keep adding color until we get our gradients where we want them to be. So if you want your gradient to be really bright or really dark, or even just really, really big, it takes a little while because you're having to blend all the colors that you chose together. Now, when we look at this picture for step number three, we can see how our colors blended together and created all sorts of new colors in between them. So let's look at right here where I made these little jumping like M's. Over it, I have my pink that is still my bright pink, just like in my first picture. But then when I started blending gently, I got this in between color here, between my fuchsia and my light pink. Then when I kept blending, I landed again in that fuchsia that I already had. Then I kept blending again, and remember, we want our colors to mix with each other in these little in-between spaces. So right here, I have another color that's kind of in between my fuchsia and my red. Then to finish off, I've got my bright red still waiting for me at the end. And then if you want, you can even make it lighter as you move away. So just like my red got really light at the end, you can do that too. Remember, step 3 is just to keep adding those colors until you are happy with your gradient. I did the same thing with my green, and I started with my regular green. Then we blended until I was happy with the middle color. Then we had my regular light green. I blended again until I was happy with the middle color. And then we ended with our light yellow green. All right, scholars. So now it is your turn to respond to this small prompt that I have here. So our prompt says, find at least one thing around your house that has a gradient. But then the second part of our response wants us to explain what we see. So in our one thing that we choose, we're going to explain the colors the same way that we explained the colors when we were looking at those pictures of the sky. So let's use an example. Let's pretend that Miss Quinones finds a flower outside that has a gradient with the colors white, orange, and red. I might say something like, I found a gradient of the colors white, orange, and red when I looked at this bright flower. Okay, scholars, so this sentence right here is meant to help you. Remember that you can go outside if you want to find a gradient, maybe in flowers, in leaves, or if you want to take a peek at the sky during a sunset. You can also stay inside and just check out some things maybe in your closet or some artwork that you created that maybe has a gradient, but just make sure that you don't forget to explain it. Also, if you make a video explaining what you see, you can always use your hands to show me how the gradient is moving. Remember that these are the 3 places that you can send back your responses. Flipgrid is for our friends in Miss Jensen's class with her art showroom Flipgrid. But if you're not in Miss Jensen's class, remember you can go to Class Dojo or Google Classroom. I think it would be best if you go to Class Dojo because Class Dojo lets you record videos and then you can explain yourself even better. If you are not 100% sure on Class Dojo, you can still go to Google Classroom and we have our folder for our choice board return. Okay, scholars? I can't wait to see what you find gradients in, and I'm looking forward to seeing your responses. Bye.